There's a rule in the small villages north of Tromsø that no travel guide will ever tell you. It isn't written in any manual. It's whispered from father to son by the fireplace when the children should already be asleep. If the forest of Øvre Dividal goes silent, you don't ask why. You run. The elders don't explain the rule. They only say there are two types of silence in the northern woods. The silence of the snow, and the other one. In January 1996, a search and rescue team was deployed to Øvre Dividal after 3 hikers vanished during a severe whiteout. It was a routine mission. They expected to find frozen bodies. What they found was harder to explain than death itself. There were no footprints, no scattered gear. It was as if 3 people had simply ceased to exist in the middle of the snow. There were only the trees. And the trees were wrong. Dr. Søren Voss documented what he witnessed over the next 40 minutes. Part of that report remains classified to this day. The declassified portion describes the following. The largest oak in the grove was pulsing with heat in a temperature of -10 degrees Fahrenheit. And 6 feet above the ground, emerging from the bark as if it had grown there, was a gold wedding band. It wasn't hanging. The metal was inside the wood. Voss pressed his ear against the trunk. The wood was warm. And he heard something that shouldn't be physically possible. The ultrasound scanners confirmed what Voss heard at that moment. Inside the solid trunk, there was activity. Rhythmic. Coordinated. The kind of activity biological systems produce when they are alive. The hikers weren't dead. But whatever was inside that tree was no longer entirely human. The first priority was extraction. Voss ordered industrial-grade diamond saws against the bark of the central oak. They weren't expecting resistance. They were expecting a rescue mission. The moment the first blade bit into the blackened wood, the tree didn't splinter. The tree bled. A thick, dark fluid surged from the shallow cut. It wasn't sap. The scent was metallic. Ferrous. The exact smell of a medical bandage changed far too late. The team backed away. Not out of training, but out of pure instinct. Then came the sound. It didn't travel through the air. It rose from the ground. A low-frequency moan, vibrating through the roots, passing through their boots, reaching straight into their bones. It was the kind of sound the human body recognizes before the mind can process it. It was the sound of something that does not want to be cut. Voss collected a sample of the fluid. Under the portable field microscope, the partial answer arrived. And it was worse than no answer at all. The plant cells hadn't just surrounded the human cells. They were utilizing them. The dark fluid surging from the tree was carrying nutrients to the upper branches, using the exact same biological structures that only 3 days prior had been circulating inside 3 living human beings. The hikers weren't trapped inside the tree. They had become the fuel for its growth. Then, the thermal sensors began to scream. The trunk's temperature didn't rise gradually. It spiked to 107 degrees in seconds. The snow around the base began to melt and boil. The wedding band Voss had seen earlier was being pulled deeper into the wood. The bark closing over the metal in real time, like a wound that refuses to stay open. The tree wasn't defending itself like a plant. It was reacting like a wounded animal. And if it could react, what else was it capable of? Voss knew that in the Arctic, everything is connected. Roots sharing nutrients. Fungi transmitting chemical signals between trees miles apart. He had studied this his entire life. He thought he understood what the forest was. He understood nothing. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the thermal cameras captured something that wasn't in any manual. Veins of heat began to pulse beneath the snow, radiating from the central oak in every direction. Reaching every pine, every birch, every root within a 3-mile radius. Pulsing in the same rhythm. The exact rhythm of a human heart in a state of permanent panic. Ground-penetrating radar confirmed what the cameras showed. The underground mycelial network had been reconfigured. What normally carried nutrients between trees was now conducting a different kind of signal. Faster. More complex. The entire forest was communicating, using something that didn't belong to it. That was when Elena made the mistake. The technician stepped off the metal platform for 3 seconds. Just 3 seconds. Long enough for her boots to touch the permafrost. White filaments, thin as hair and strong as steel, shot through the snow and pierced the leather of her boots. She didn't scream in pain. She screamed because something got in. For 3 seconds, Elena stood perfectly still. Her eyes rolled back until only the whites were visible. When the team pulled her back onto the platform, she wasn't silent anymore. She was whispering, in a voice that sounded like dry leaves dragging against stone, reciting memories that weren't hers. Her father's childhood, her daughter's favorite song. Private details Elena could never have known. And on the skin of her forearm, the first veins began to turn black. 3 seconds of contact. That was all the forest needed. What it was doing with that time, Voss still didn't know. By midnight, Voss was the only one left on the platform. Not because the others had gone home, but because the ground had decided it was time. The forest of Øvre Dividal was pulsing with a low, sick green light. Every tree was vibrating at the same frequency. And Voss recognized the pattern. It was the same rhythm captured by the sensors. The exact rhythm of a human heart in state of permanent panic. He looked down at his watch. The digital display began to flicker. Then, it accelerated. Seconds turned into hours. Hours turned into days. Days into something that could no longer be measured. Outside the forest, in Tromsø, only minutes had passed. But inside, time had been hijacked. Next to the platform, the snow ruptured. A sapling emerged. In less than 60 seconds, it grew 30 feet tall. But it didn't grow toward the light. It grew toward Voss. That was when he understood. The forest wasn't just consuming bodies. It was consuming time. Inside the wood, the hikers still existed. But not as humans. They were living through 10,000 winters every hour. Trapped in infinite biological loops. Freezing, regenerating, freezing again. No sleep. No movement. No death. Voss felt the first filament touch his neck. There was no pain. There was only... His last vision was the forest expanding. Not as an ecosystem, but as an entity. A living machine built of flesh and bark, slowly creeping toward the south. 72 hours later, the Norwegian military arrived. There was no platform, no team, no human remains. There was only a dense, ancient forest that didn't exist on any previous map. The report was classified as an unresolved anomaly. Not for lack of evidence, but because the evidence didn't fit into reality. Only one file was never released. An audio recording, captured in the last 90 seconds before the signal vanished. 32 seconds of sound that no one has been able to explain. What's on that recording is the next file.